Caicos and many of the other Caribbean islands. In the Turks and Caicos, we have fewer European travelers than we do from our North American, Eastern Caribbean counterparts. So if there is an opportunity or a low-hanging fruit, as Dr. Amos referred to, there is the multi-destination opportunity for Antigua and Turks and Caicos to take advantage of a collaborative effort. Hugh spoke about the sexy feel of commercials, or the non-sexy, but we find that a lot of influencers, they don't use the traditional marketing strategies that we've used in the past. They are looking at social media, and these again are low-hanging fruits and opportunities for the Turks and Caicos and the region at large. There are, from cruise conversion, because of the logistics of Turks and Caicos, predominantly most of our room inventory is here in Providenciales, and Grand Turk is our cruise mecca. There's opportunities that has allowed itself in day uses of local hotel there. And it's just now an opportunity for the public and the private sector to look at these as this is creating a demand at the Bohio Resort in Grand Turk. So this is obviously something that cruise passengers are looking at. In the Bahamas, cruise passengers take advantage of the day opportunity at Atlantis. So obviously there's something out there. Exactly what it is, I don't think there's any data that supports the conversion rate of cruise passengers to long-term stay, and that's, again, is a low-hanging fruit and opportunity for the Caribbean.
All right. Before I ask more of the panel, let me just invite the audience to assemble before the microphones to make your comments and pose your questions. You can do that now, and I'll come back to you. But we can't have a discussion about tourism without talking about airlift.
Right.
Minister?
Yes, I think you're right. But allow me half a second before airlift, because we can't talk about building collaboration and dealing with capacity without discussing funding.
Yes.
Financing.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to use this opportunity before the CDB to deal with that, because that's the biggest problem for us in the Caribbean. Yeah. And I'm going to give you a bit of a statistic which hopefully will shake you up. Last year, the multilaterals and funding agencies for global funding provided 0.15% of the global loans to tourism. 235 million US dollars was the total amount on lent to tourism entities for sustainability. Where did that 235 billion go? It went essentially to the 20% of tourism that is driven by the big guys, and very little to the 80% that is driven by the small guys. I invite you, CDB, to consider your own loan portfolio and to determine where have your unlending or lending or wholesaling, whatever you do, actually go. What percentage of your loans have gone to tourism, and particularly the SM? Call
TVs.
them SMEs if you want.
TVs.
But I'm inserting the T. SMTEs. Because that's how we are going to build the growth and the economy. And that GDP statistic which was indicated there, where 10% arrivals can translate into 0.58 to 0.89% of GDP, and in the long run, up to 35, up to $100 in dollar terms. $100 could translate to $35 of value added to the GDP. These are the important considerations. How do we do that? And we can do that only if we are able to change the consumption and production patterns. So let's get to airlift, because airlift is a cost. And airlift is not driven by a wish or a desire, because airlines fly because they have load factors and that they have yields that are compatible with their growth and revenue agenda. How do we in the Caribbean afford airlift? Well, we first of all look at the straight demand issue, and we collaborate with partners such as tour operators and travel agents, countries, governments that is, through their tourist boards or tourism authorities, and of course the airlines. But the airlines require one of three methods of support from us. One, revenue guarantees, which we abhor and we eschew.
Seat support.
The second, of course, seat support. And the third is marketing support, what we call marketing behind the gateway. Now, our banks have to get interested, Dr. Peters, in funding this lifeline arrangement, which enables tourism connectivity and arrivals to grow, and by it, demand to come. So we have to ask ourselves, how do we change the whole idea and the pattern and the psyche of our lending institutions to begin to focus on tourism as a key driver of the regional economy? And we go to DOMREP to see some of the answers. They have a bank called Banco Popular, which focuses on lending to tourism, for agriculture, for manufacturing, for all these wonderful experiences I mentioned, but more so to build tourism capacity.
Thank you, sir. Let's go to the floor and invite contributions. Sir?
Hello? Samuel, I'm going to dodge financing. You know that when I see tourism, bad word, because bad reputation of environment and so on. We recently spent a very wonderful Costa Rica.
Could you just look, sorry, speak directly into the microphone and not off to the side. But
I a wonderful like me. A lot of people.
He still has a problem with it.
Can you?
Try it.
Can you hear?
No.
Hold on.
Mic is an issue.
Yeah, hello? Yeah, I recently spent a fantastic week in Costa Rica. Now, Costa Rica can really show the Caribbean how to do ecotourism. It's not beach tourism, it's jungle tourism. And it starts in school. It starts with children in school learning to respect the environment that they live in, cleaning up the yards in school. There is no litter, the way they treat their animals. It's absolutely amazing. And that opened my eyes about how to integrate tourism with the environment, and Costa Rica leads in that. Secondly, my point is about this infestation that we have in the tourist industry nowadays called cruise ships.
Infestation.
Cruise ship tourism is not good for the Caribbean. It takes away real tourists. Cruise ship tourists, this thing about conversion of cruise ship tourists into long-stay tourists, it doesn't really happen a lot. When you're a small boat operator, as I used to be in a former life, when I charge my cruise ship guests $50 to go on a fishing trip, the cruise ship turns it around and charges them $100. So then they tell me this has been a great trip, but it's not worth $100. Well, I only get 50. And you know, a lot of the cruise ship tourists don't get off the ship. The cruise is the holiday. And they look at the island from the ship and they go, yeah, I've seen Grenada. But they don't come back. And like a taxi driver said to me one time, the only thing they leave back is their shadow. Just one other thing. In terms of opportunities, let me suggest that there's an opportunity out there, and his name is Donald Trump. You can't get a visa to America? No visa needed in the Caribbean. That should be a slogan. Thank you.
There you go.
Do we react to?
Well, you
Because I'd like to react to that intervention a while
Yes,
ago.
yeah.
Because I have a fundamental difficulty with the intervention. Cruise tourism represents an opportunity for wealth creation in your destination. When that cruise ship lands or docks in your port, it brings wealth. What you do with it is everything. How many of us have enough shopping facilities to interest those passengers who are on board? How many of us have enough indigenous craft items, creative products, which will excite those passengers? Those passengers are visiting you for authentication of their visit, not just to say, we are passing through your destination. They want to authenticate their visit. What authenticates that visit? Indigenous, autochthonous products. We must build the capacity of our local artisans and our artists and our craftsmen to generate those products so that these people will come off the ship to have it. We must ensure that the entertainment is at a high level, that the quality of what we call the shore excursion experience. And we have good attractions, and we can do better. We need to build more attractions. And once we do that, they will come. And the second thing, we must make a concerted effort to do cruise conversion. We don't. How many of us really have a program at the port where people sit, create a condition that is conducive to have a discussion with people about coming back to your country? What kind of incentives do we provide? Do we have any visitor proposition? Do we have any marketing proposition for them when they come to enable them to come back? We need to think these things through carefully and seriously treat with cruise as a business proposal, not just the activity of the cruise lines. And a lot of us sit down and allow the cruise lines to dictate the pace and tone and tenure of the relationship.
Okay. Thank you, Minister. Sir?
Thank you very much. Fascinating discussion. Commend the speakers. I think the Caribbean is in a very special. My name is Raul Herrera. I'm a partner at the law firm of Arnold and Porter K. Scholler in Washington. I'm a finance lawyer. And I think the region is in a very special place in terms of it being a safety zone when you look around the rest of the world, other regions in the world. You've got proximity, you've got banking, et cetera. My comments are going to be twofold. One, the political, and two, the financial. I think the notion of a EU-type model where you get a political authority in place so that travel is facilitated, less forms, and two, where you, like the cruise lines, they all get together, they have an association, and they speak with one voice with dozens of governments. I think the notion of speaking with one voice and having a party across from the other is a way to go, because otherwise they'll just negotiate you down to the common denominator. If Dominica doesn't agree on the per passenger fee that the cruise line wants to pay, they'll go to Antigua or they'll go to Turks, and they'll just make, chop and. So one is put together a political authority that will address port authority development, cruise ship negotiations and the like. Two, the financial aspect of it. We've done it in Guatemala with tourism receivables from the major bank. The gentleman mentioned Popular in the DR. To the extent that you can, and size matters, that you can do two things. One is a cross-asset securitization. You have this single port authority, single tourism authority. If you do it, and the lawyers can do it easily, a cross-asset securitization, you then have a much larger base from which to borrow. Instead of the little islands borrowing individually, you consolidate them in a cross-asset securitization holding company, and then they go to the market to borrow. And maybe they don't go to the Canadian banks only. Maybe they go to the, other banks around the world. That's one. And two, the assets, having the financial institutions issuing bonds based on those receivables that'll provide liquidity to the institutions. But critically is the political aspect of having a joint authority, having a regional authority, so that there's one voice speaking on behalf of. And at last year's meeting at the CDB, there was a panel on port authorities. The gentleman from Antigua talked about the initiative, and it's greatly needed. I was in one island. They have one Perth. The idea was to create a second Perth. Their actual cruise arrangement was both cargo and passenger. And for about $20 million, we could have created a separate passenger village for cruise lines, separate from the cargo area, to make it a lot more attractive. And it just requires a little financial engineering and a little political consensus. But the notion of collaboration is critical, and it actually should be integration. You need to be facilitating the investment that's available. There's a lot of liquidity around the world, and it's a matter of getting together, having the political consensus with the financial instruments that are available. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. All right, let me bring our next, contributor there.
Thanks. So I'm not going to try to put in
I realize that.
Thanks for very, very timely and much needed discussion at the panel this morning. Honorable Minister from Jamaica, you mentioned 5 passions that I guess people travel for, to pursue. I want to suggest, however, that in the English-speaking Caribbean in particular, not so much the Dutch, we ignore at our peril one of the passions which I think is important, which is sin, for various reasons, whether religious conservatism, cultural conservatism. I know in Jamaica you might have dabbled a little bit in having, decriminalized marijuana under an IMF program, by the way, which suggests some implicit support there. But the rest of the English-speaking Caribbean in particular, I think, does not pay attention to this, and I think it's a tragedy that Amsterdam should be the sin capital of Europe, and Las Vegas the sin capital of this hemisphere. I think this is something in the Caribbean we should not ignore, because it will just be hypocritical of us to continue to ignore the potential of that. Thank you.
But I thought I covered that when I spoke about rich biodiversity.
I hope that Marla Dukaran isn't suggesting, though, that we need actually a minister of sin.
Well, it's very interesting because Dubai has just announced a new minister of happiness.
There you go.
And so what can I tell you?
Again to the floor. Yes.
Yes, good morning. I'm Jerry Butler, and I'm the Inter-American Development Bank Executive Director. And I guess the Inter-American Development Bank is probably one of the largest financiers of infrastructure in the Western Hemisphere. And we always have this discussion at the board level about whether it makes sense to finance the tourism infrastructure in the Caribbean. So I listened to Minister Bartlett talk about the lack of financing, and I listened to Stacy talk about the Bahamas tourism product, and I just happened to have been in Costa Rica with Brian, who spoke before, and yes, we experienced, I've been to Costa Rica a few times, so yes, we experienced their tourism product. My experience, having traveled, I guess, to just about every country in the Caribbean and worked with many governments in the Caribbean, is if you take this audience in the room here, when we have a discussion on tourism, the overwhelming theme is that tourism is a product that is alien to the local culture. And why do I make that statement? What I say is, until the political directorate realizes that unless ownership of the tourism plant is something that is a normal part of the indigenization of the tourism plant, nothing is going to happen. Yeah, it's okay for us to be artisans. Yes, it's okay for us to be maids and butlers. It may even be okay for us to be hotel managers, which is very rare in the Caribbean. But Minister Bartlett is speaking at the end of the month, at the end of next month, at the National Organization of Hotel Owners and Operators who are black. And the panel he'll be speaking at, I'll be moderating that panel. But the eye-opener is to be in a U.S. environment where black African Americans who have been marginalized have suddenly decided that every hotel they've stayed in for the last 40 years was never owned by a black person, and maybe the model has to change, that they need to start owning their hotels. They need to buy from black Americans who are providing procurement facilities, et cetera, et cetera. It amazes me, that statement about tourism not being financed in the Caribbean. The largest tourism investment in the Western Hemisphere was a $4.5 billion hotel in the Bahamas, funded by the Chinese. Kind of makes you think, eh? The only instrument invented in music in the Western Hemisphere in the 20th century has been the steel pan. That is trademarked and copyrighted in Japan, not in Trinidad. What I'm saying is, until the political directorate and the local people see the tourism product as their own, until we own the cruise ships, we build the cruise ships, we pilot the cruise ships that come through our waters, until we own the airlift, until we own the tourism plan. And what I'm trying to tell you is, you take this island, Turks and Caicos, Provo, their tourism product, which is, Stacey, it's amazing compared to what we're doing in the Bahamas, the high-end resorts, everything. I've been to 6. None are owned by anyone from the Turks and Caicos, and yet they're all financed by banks in the Turks and Caicos Island. So if banks in the Turks and Caicos Island are financing a tourism plant, money is available. It's just not available for people in Turks and Caicos to access the financing. They certainly have land, they certainly have the labor, and capital is the only other entity you need to create an economically viable product. The problem is access to capital for us, not access to capital for the tourism product. And I think the political directorate has to seriously take that up when they start talking about who is involved in tourism and at what level they're involved in tourism. That's my comment.
Thank you, sir. All right.
Can I make a comment on that, if you will? Because
Make it very short.
yes, he's spot on to a large extent. But there's something I believe we need to think about. I spoke about the production and consumption patterns that need to change. And the big infrastructure of tourism, in other words, the cost of acquisition of a tourist is very high. And that is difficult to be borne by us in this region as small island states. And that's why we go for FDIs. But the consumption of the tourists in the area is supposed to be ours. We should own that. And that's where we make our money. We can't buy the airlines, I agree. We perhaps can't make the 1,000-room hotels, I agree. But we can own the experience. That's where I want our heads to be concentrated, to finance the experience that the visitor gets when he comes into your destination. That's where the money is. And that's where the little people come in. And that's where the real ownership will come.
Yes, thanks. Minister, I get back to you. In gastronomy, for example, last year, July, 2 street hawkers in Singapore got a Michelin star for their food. It has brought no ends of people going to their street stalls and the rest of it. In New York now, for the persons there, more people are eating out of trucks on the sidewalks than used to go to restaurants.
That's what I'm
So it is happening. Yes. We have not, however, awakened to it. What is interesting as well, somewhere in Park Avenue, New York, you go there and you see some South Koreans with a jerk stall up, selling Jamaican jerk food. Interestingly enough, it is happening. But the problem though, and this is where the banks, the CDB and everybody else needs to come in, and I speak at the moment as a lecturer in the Faculty of Law at UA and a law practitioner as well, and somebody who has had some serious regional experience. But part of it is that we have not found a way to break down the silos and get all persons working together in a common mission. We, for example, go out and we argue at all these multilateral arrangements and so on, geographical indicators, for example. Jamaica has gone out and we have represented, we have done all sorts of things, but there's nobody on the back end working to ensure that there's effective geographical indicator protection. The banks are not financing that work either. So we are not able to leverage the arrangements that are already out there and begging. Just this morning I got something, there's somebody who is doing some protest work in India, a reggae musician in India, protesting Modi through reggae. He puts up his sound system and he goes everywhere to protest. What are we getting out of it? I got some information, I don't know how many of us have followed it, where the PwC projection is that by 2030, the Chinese economy will be a 30.9 trillion economy. The US 23 point something, India 190, 19 point something trillion. Are we refocusing our attention there? Are the banks assisting the small persons to get there? And how are we ensuring that the required training? What I find from work that I do on the street, particularly with Street Law Caribbean, with persons on the street, is that the greatest problem remains that they are not sufficiently aware of how to protect their rights and to develop their businesses. And this is where the banks have to be prepared to go on board and to ensure that the knowledge that Dr. Peters spoke about, that there's translation there, and that the appropriate structures are put in place for persons to translate their inherent knowledge, translate their inherent skills into viable businesses which have sustainable economic impact. And I think we're going to have that conversation or risk having the same conversation for the next 20, 30, or however many years, unless we get to that point of recognizing that the individual and not just the macro considerations need to be at play and that we need to focus significant attention there. Sadly enough for the CDB, and I keep saying it, we do a lot of these studies, but most of them are macro in their orientation. And we do not see enough grassroots orientation in the work being done by a lot of our institutions, including the university that I teach at, quite frankly.
Okay, thank you, sir. All right, let's take one more from the floor here.
Yes, I just have 3 comments. Since we are in the tourism section, we are from Montserrat, so you're all welcome to come there. We have the barracks in Plymouth. My premier is sitting right there, so premier, job well done. The second thing, my introduction to the Caribbean was through one channel, and nobody talked about it, cricket. When I see the West Indies players today, all you see is Emirates, and nobody in India talked about, like they see West Indies there, but our today's cricket is not, so when in the times of Vivian Richards and Colin Craft, that's when the gentleman talked about reggae, that's when it was introduced in those times. We're not utilizing that source, and where the cricket plays in the largest market? In India. But when you see today's players from West Indies, they have none of the logos, none of the advertisement is there. And we're talking about 1.3 billion people, so all you see is Dubai, Maldives, Singapore, and all those type of things. In terms of central authority, SARC, Association of Southeast Regional Countries, and that these countries are not friendly, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh. It's easier to organize a tourist visa than their own people, because they understand when the visitor goes to Nepal, to see the Mount Everest, they're going to pass by through India and they can go to Pakistan. So I always laugh that people from India and Pakistan cannot go to each other, but when the tourism comes, they're easy to roam around. That's important to understand. And the third thing is that we have to know where the growth next 10, 20 years of growth will come from. It's going to be in Asia. West Indies is not represented there. That's where you have to target. North America and Europe, you're competing with small islands of Maldives, Tahiti, you're competing with those guys. It has to be. Dubai, you talked about Dubai. How did Dubai become that? They went out. The central authority was created. It was promoted through its airline. Making a noise with strategic focus is the way to go to attract those dollars.
Thank you very much, sir. All right, let's stay on the floor.
Thank you very much, moderator. My question really is to Dr. Peters. We've looked at, the study has been very interesting. I agree with a lot of the comments that have been made. But there's one thing that bothers me, and I'm from Barbados, by the way. My name is Seabert Frederick. I work in the Ministry of Finance. We have experienced a significant increase in tourist arrivals, okay? particularly in the last year or so. But what has happened is that we have not seen the commensurate increase in foreign exchange earnings. And despite the fact that you've mentioned a lot of factors that we need to leverage this and all that, that was not the case before. My concern is whether when the rich uncles and not so rich uncles come to the region and come to Barbados, whether the payment system is being organized overseas and we're not getting the foreign exchange that we used to get from such, the arrivals of such uncles and aunts and so on. And I think it is something that I have to try to answer. And I know the Minister of Finance asked me this. I can't answer it because I don't work in tourism. But of course, when the foreign exchange levels are down, we have to find answers and solutions. And it's ourselves and the central bank that try to knock our heads together to find out what the real reasons are. But since you've done the study, I wonder if you could enlighten me as to what, if that's the reason, or if there are other reasons that we have not been able to identify when you have an increase in the arrivals, but the commensurate increase in spending and foreign exchange is not there, and our foreign exchange, our reserve, what do you call the RM ratio, or the number of weeks in foreign exchange is dropping as we speak, even though the tourism industry is improving and arrivals are increasing.
Okay. Fine, thank you, sir. Let me give Dr. Peters a chance to respond to that.
Okay, so thank you for your question. You know, it's funny that sort of the origin of this study was somewhat grounded in that observation, the fact that arrivals in Barbados were going up, but we were not seeing any sort of return or yield in terms of growth. So in short, I don't know really what the answer is. I do know that per visitor expenditures have declined over time. And one thing I'll tell you, when we talk about Barbados in particular, you know, I think you have to go almost beyond this discussion of tourism, right? Because there's so many issues with the Barbados economy. I could start from now and we could talk for another 2 hours about the need for certain types of reforms, structural reforms in Barbados, and there's certain things that, for example, tourism is such a huge industry in Barbados, but there's so many concessions given to these large tourism entities. Are they paying their fair share in taxes, things like that? So I think the answer to that question, I don't know the answer, but what I do know that it's a lot more complex than just looking at visitor arrivals.
Dr. Peters, can I just challenge you a little bit on that though? Is this a situation where the contracting arrangements really reflect the fact that payments are being made overseas by entities that control the tourist facilities? The hotels, for instance, working through the travel agents in North America and Europe. The traveler is paying those entities, and therefore the foreign exchange is staying over there. It doesn't come into the country. Am I right, Minister?
Can I come in? But I think that first of all, the sale of the
attraction.
The attraction, yeah. Or let's say the rooms. Yeah. You see, the issue first of all is ADRs. And then the business models that you're using goes a long way in determining what ADRs you end up getting. The increase of all-inclusives, or perhaps I should say the increased commoditization of tourism, has led to a drive for value and price, with price taking a very strong position. The new markets that are emerging are not like the traditional markets. These are middle class that are less able to afford higher prices as we have been accustomed to. And so what you're finding is that small island states that traditionally have been high-end destinations are now competing at a different level than in the past. So they are now competing with the same new destinations, the Cancuns and the Punta Canas and so on and so forth, that have large volume of rooms, 60,000, 70,000 rooms. And these tour operators and so on are driving business into those areas and less into ours. So the smaller countries are finding that their ADRs are falling. And therefore, that explains why you have greater volume of arrivals, but a lower foreign exchange generation. In our case in Jamaica, we are in the reverse because Minister Shaw is very lucky. He has increasing tourism expenditure now. In fact, for the first time, our expenditure increase is a higher rate than our arrivals. I mean, our arrivals for stopover is in the 2.5%, and our revenue is at 6.7 and 7%. So it has to do with that. And the second thing I believe it has to do with is the level of experiences, the number and variety and quality of experiences that the destination has to offer to the visitor. So when the visitor comes in and he buys a package, he probably just stays within the hotel because there's nowhere else to go.
But he's bought that package before you arrived in Jamaica.
But guess what? He now has the capacity to buy whatever he sees, not just what the package offers. Because technology now, platforms and apps and so on, provide him with a whole range of options within the very area. And then the issue of Airbnb, which offers yet another whole profile and arrangement. So we, in our destination, have to seriously retrofit. We have to really look at ourselves and what is it that we're offering in the new arrangement that is out there in the marketplace.
Quick follow-up on that.
Yeah, so I just wanted to basically support that argument. I mean, because it's basically a volume value argument. So the thing about it is, if your per capita expenditure is continually declining, as you can see in this figure, so what must happen? What is the extent to which your volumes must increase before you get that effect? So even though the arrivals are increasing, to what extent are they increasing, right? So maybe you need now, at this time, because of this decline, you need an even greater level of visitor arrivals to support the same level of foreign exchange earnings that you would have otherwise.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
My name is Raquel, Governor for Brazil, and I realized today that Caribbean received 2 times that the tourists to Brazil. So I was wondering what should be done. So I'm sure that you have a magnificent resorts, lots of things that are great, but I think you should expand the concern to the whole productive chain, because it's the way to retain the wealth here. For example, I'm not a specialist in, I don't know the geographic of the islands, but I'm sure you have land to grow food, especially the bigger islands. So you should think about developing policies that are inclusive. For example, in Brazil, we develop an inclusive policy that smallholder farmers could grow food, grow vegetables and produce good food to give to schools during the whole year. So this is a way to include these people and retain wealth here. And then this industry of food can grow, and then maybe some countries can be autosufficient. So I think that maybe you import too much food, and this is important to not only the tourism, but also the whole productive chain. So, and also I'd like to end telling that Brazil is also open to share experiences, because it's a pity that Caribbean that receives so many tourists cannot retain this. And I think it's not only this sector. You should think about the whole productive chain.
Okay. Thank you very much. Before I let the panel respond to the linkages, yeah, thank you. Sir?
Yes. Thank you. Guy Josephs in Lucia. I wanted to ask the panel whether you ever considered, in the cruise sector, we had some discussions on this earlier, whether the Caribbean region should make a decision to engage the cruise sector, as an example, and say, look here, you want to come to this region, why don't you tender, compete? Who gives the best price? Then you get the franchise to service the Caribbean. Because we look at a number of things and we are looking at what are the possibilities. What can we do? When one country competes against another, this one wants to charge this head tax, another one says, well, you can come in here for free. Did we ever consider the impact of such a decision and whether it would be more beneficial to us as a region than as individual countries? The other one I wanted to ask about is, do we treat tourism as an export in terms of what happens? Because when a tourist comes to your country, I heard about the incentives being given and all of this. So for manufacturing, we give the various incentives that are required. So if tourism is treated as an export, because the person is coming over, they come in to live in your country for a period of time, they eat, they drink. So it's the consumption side of what we can capitalize on. Because I know we talk about a lot of things, but the reality is, can we resolve all of these issues? And sometimes we get overwhelmed by so many things we look at. What are the 3 or 4 things we can do to begin to capitalize and see that a greater return remains within this region? And I don't think it should be viewed from the standpoint of one country as opposed to another. Because regional travel, if one economy is doing very well, let's say from the tourism industry in other parts of the world, what you would find is now these people from that country would be able now to travel to other countries within the Caribbean, and then the wealth that is generated there would be shared with other sister countries.
Thank you.
So we have to look at that from that standpoint.
Thank you very much, sir. All right, let's stay on the floor before I ask the panel to respond.
Great. My name is Rita Shannon. I'm from Crown Agents Investment Management. When I look at the data, you've had a tripling in the number of tourist arrivals, and yet you've had a 43% decline in average spend per tourist. If you were a CEO of a company that had those numbers, you'd be fired. And so you have to ask yourself the question, what is the vision and the strategy for tourism in the Caribbean? And I think you've got to think about, what do you want those numbers to look like in 2030? So I didn't see any projections for what, if this trend continues, what is this likely to look at? And I think that's very, very important in terms of determining the quantity of tourists you want and the quality of tourists you want. And that's where I really agree with the minister from Jamaica. I think it's about clearly defining the type of tourists you're looking for. You don't necessarily want a mass market of tourism, because all you're going to see is that number will continue to decline. So you've had 43% decline, and that will halve even further if you continue to focus on mass tourism. So, my question and my challenge is really, do we have a clearly defined vision and strategy for the Caribbean region as a whole? Not just Jamaica, not just individual islands, but collectively setting a clearly defined strategy that looks at those two things, numbers and quality of tourism. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Let's bring Minister Shaw in here.
I'd just like to say that the comments of the lady that just spoke about agricultural goods as an example. Minister Bartlett has established a tourism linkages committee for us to look at how we can maximize linkages, not just agricultural linkages. There are other linkages, manufactured goods, that things we do locally, processed foods as well. And it just occurs to me that here is an area that if we could just move it from the talk shop into an arena of action, not just a Jamaican action arena now, but a regional action arena, where in many of our territories you don't have the land space to produce the range and volume of vegetables and other things that are needed for the tourists. But guess what? We have it in Jamaica. Guyana has it.
Yeah.
Other areas, we have land and we have the capacity to produce it. In Jamaica, we have hundreds of thousands of acres of idle land. The sugar industry is just drifting along, which needs a replacement for it. We're talking about arable land, flat lands that can be mechanized, that we can produce, I mean, millions and millions of tons of the things that are now flying into Jamaica, into Turks and Caicos, into the entire region. The planes are carrying in the tourists, and the food is below on the same flight. And that is why, it's true. And so that is why we're not getting the added value that is intrinsically there. So the issue is, we have the tourism organization, right? Can we have a study? Could we start? I like what I call the RACE formula. Research, action, communication, and evaluation. Could we start by doing a study, although we know kind of nominally that it is, we know that, but let's put it up on the screen too and look at it. Let's see how many tons of food we are importing and compare it with what we produce and sell. And you know it's going to be a very, very stark and unbelievable figure. And how could we use our various organizations, including the tourism organization, to get the information together, start the research in the RACE formula, and then let us how we can put an action program now in the RACE formula to say, okay, how much carrots, how much this, how much can we produce? Because right now, you know, in a way, our hands have been tied because we grant all these incentives for duty-free entry of everything. So the tourists come in and there's duty-free entry for everything, including food. But maybe if we look at the economies of scale, maybe we can produce to be competitive with what is being produced in the United States or elsewhere. I recently learned, Ed, that plummy tomatoes, the little tiny ones in Jamaica, is 60% of the it's about 40% cheaper than the imported plummy tomatoes. Now maybe we can find that we can build competitiveness to compete. I would like one of the results of this session today is that we get granular. We do some research and see how we can really put something firmly in the ground, work together, let's have a partnership. The countries that can produce it, that have the capacity to produce it, let us work together. Let's get the support of the multilateral organizations like my friend Therese here, right? And let's get it done. We can build the value and we can create the wealth.
I suppose I sound like Isaac Newton. Eureka! Finally we found it, because this Minister of Finance has gotten it.
But
and believe me, that's really what we want. We want our ministers of finance across the region to get it, that if you build the capacity at the community level, in manufacture, with agriculture and so on, then you will lift the retention level of the US dollar in your area, and the wealth will stay here. Thank you, Minister Shaw.
This is a fabulous discussion. My first job when I graduated from graduate school in the Bahamas was working as a research analyst in the Ministry of Tourism. So I was one of those people analyzing those surveys that people fill out at the airport. Fast forward to now, and it's a long time ago, but some of these same issues were confronting tourism policymakers then. So we're coming now to, I think, a really crucial point, because the data tells the truth. And the point the previous speaker made about a CEO would have been fired if we had a 43% decline in revenues is pretty telling. So on to Minister Shaw's last point. The IDB is about to do a value-added study on tourism in Jamaica, because I think a lot of us are working in this industry blind. And I was also happy to hear the CTO director talk about some of the really deep dive into the data that the CTO has on this industry. But the fact of the matter is the Caribbean tourism product has lost competitiveness over the last 3 decades. And nobody seems to want to recognize that. That's a fact. We are not competitive. And by the way, it's affecting our GDP per capita in every single member country in the region as a result. Now, luckily, we have 3 commodity producers in the region: Guyana, Trinidad, and Suriname. So overall, we may be getting some growth in this region. But the real driver, tourism, our biggest industry, is poorly performing. Okay, so that's one fact. The other fact is we have social indicators, meaning poor educational outcomes, horrible crime data and statistics that go hand in hand with this industry. These are 2 developments that are working against each other. So there are a whole lot of complex factors that are producing these kinds of results in the charts. The other piece, and thank you very much, Peter, for this study, pieces that are missing here include the cost of electricity, which is the single most important cost in the tourism product in the Caribbean. Very few countries are addressing that as an issue. Jamaica, thankfully, is leading the way in moving to LNG and more renewables. Barbados has been moving to renewables, and that should help. But other countries are not doing diddly squat. We're still relying on heavy fuel oils that are expensive, and it's costing tourism. So it's really, it's price, but it's also, it's the quality of the product, and it's the policies we really need to move on. As the IDB's general manager, I'd like to say we are trying to work with you to get some of these issues addressed. And I'm very, very pleased to see that CDB is taking this initiative to do this work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. In the time remaining, I just want the panel to give me a wrap-up statement really across the board, because you've heard a lot here today. There clearly is a lot of work to be done, and therefore, from my impression is that we're optimistic about the future. But as I said before, a lot of work and specialized work needs to be done. Now, we talk about research being done. I almost wanted to challenge Minister Shaw on the fact that we have had a lot of work, for instance, on this whole matter of food production. But we've had some failures. Caribbean Food Corporation, for instance, is just an empty building in Port of Spain, Trinidad. We've talked about putting together, really outstanding, very extensive food production, say in Guyana and so on. That has not happened in the way that we expected. But let me not set up another subject for another day. Let's deal with the tourism sector as you see it. Hugh Riley, your final comment here.
Well, I think very quickly then, one of the previous speakers talked about, well, where are we going? What is the strategic plan? What's the vision for Caribbean tourism? We are actually coming to the end of a cycle that started in 2012 and ends in 2017, when the vision crafted for Caribbean tourism by the CTO was to position the Caribbean as the most desirable year-round warm weather destination by the end of 2017. And we're actually in the process of crafting what will happen in the next 5 years. And we didn't have the time here, so we couldn't really, we could examine how we've done in that 5-year period and talk about desirability and how we measure that and what happened to the year-round balance of evening out seasonality and so on. So just in closing, though, I'll say this, that we've spent a lot of time looking at the surface issues, and there isn't enough time to drill down. But the one thing that we didn't talk enough about, and we have to fix this, is the experience. We can talk till cows come home about all these other things which are really very important, but we need to fix the experience that we deliver to the people who spend money and get on planes and come to give us that money. We're faltering there, and we need to fix that. So if we are the most tourism-dependent region on the planet, which in fact we are, then we must care more than anybody else. And I think that we need to do some serious work in fixing that experience.
Okay. Ms. Cox?
One of the things that we do really well in Turks and Caicos is our partnership. We have an amazing partnership with our government, and speaking from the private sector perspective, we always approach, whether it's the airline or whether it's Zika or whether it's the shared economy, we always approach that with a tripod approach, whether it's from our Ministry of Tourism or our Airports Authority. And listening to some of the speakers or the contributors here today, I want to just state that the conversion of cruise passengers, I think we see a drop in the GDP generally because we're across the region with this one-size-fits-all in our offering, whether it's the T-shirts or whether it's the rum punch or it's the cold towel upon arrival. We have to pretty much select our lane and be intentional about our intentions. If we are going to be known as a culinary destination or a cultural destination, let's do that and do that well. But oftentimes we find ourselves wanting to be like Jamaica or wanting to be like Turks and Caicos, but it's not a one-size-fits-all in the industry. Someone spoke about their experience in Costa Rica. There is somewhat of a disconnect between the students and the tourism program or the local community and tourism, because oftentimes the local community look at tourism as a thing. It's not a thing. It's something that we all have to be involved in. And when we have themes across the region, whether it's from CTO or any other government organization, those themes should be able to trickle down into the local community to see how they can be a part of this thing called tourism, or even in the schools through various programs. Traditional marketing, we need to, I believe, come out of that box of the traditional marketing. The millennials are not looking at traditional distribution channels. They're going through non-traditional platforms to see what's out there. And like Honorable said before, it's that they know more about our destinations than we do. Another unique thing that we do here in the Turks and Caicos is once per year we go out as a destination, public and private. The Premier goes on this trip and we speak about Turks and Caicos not only to our travel partners but the influencers out there in the industry. Someone spoke about the disconnect between locals and ownership in the industry. I want to say Sir Royston, who does it well in Grenada. I want to speak about a colleague of mine, Sanovnik in St. Lucia, and the Grey Cliff Partners in the Bahamas as well. So there are huge opportunities in the industry. There is also opportunities for agriculture, there's ecotourism, and there is just a number of unconventional opportunities. Sun, sand, and sea happened organically. It's now time for us to get outside of the box and non-traditional opportunities that connects both the local and the tourism sector.
Okay, thank you. Minister Bartlett?
Well, I think, first of all, I want to really say that this has been a very rewarding experience. The contributions from both the panels as well as the audience, I think, have been rich and very loaded with solid positions that we can take forward. I believe that there are probably 4 things that we want to take away from this. First of all, that we as the Caribbean are underperforming in tourism. Second, that we need to build the capacity of our people to deliver on the demand that tourism offers. We need to train more. We need to provide more funding support for entrepreneurial development. We need to provide more locally created and derived goods. And thirdly, that we need to collaborate. We need to make sure that we're looking at ourselves as a whole. The market is demanding more from us. And the new configurations that now exist in terms of the emerging markets of Asia and the far-flung areas in China and so on are not demanding a single experience, but multiple experiences. So they want to visit one destination and move to many destinations. And I think that that is the model that requires the attention of not just we at the policy level, but also the private sector, because the partnership that the private and public sector brings together will enable this to happen. And finally, I think that the whole business of rationalizing access within borders, the whole business of visa regimes we have to look at. We have to look at how is it that we will be able to rationalize also airspace to provide single fees rather than the multiple fees that airlines have to pay to come into our destination. And the fiscal issues, which ministers of finance are concerned about, I want us to review tourism taxation. If we view tourism as the export, which our friend from St. Lucia said, then we would appreciate that you tax not at the front end, but at the back end. Bring the visitor here, make him consume, and he pays for consumption. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. All right, that's a good point at which to say thank you to our panel. And I'd like you to indicate. We certainly learned a lot today, and I trust that this discussion will continue, but more so that there'll be some action coming out on a number of the suggestions that have been put on the table. Let me remind you that Minister Bartlett's paper that you referred to earlier is available on the bank's website, and there's a special URL for that, BOJ, which is the Bank of Governors, .carrybank.org, boj.carrybank.org. BOG, sorry. My glasses are not working so well today. bog.carrybank.org. And there's an app as well, which you'll find at the bank's website, 2017. The number of the presentations are available on thumb drives as well, which are on the table on my left. And if you go to the YouTube channel, you will certainly find these presentations there as well. So you've got a lot of opportunities to follow it up, and most importantly, share with everybody else. Coming up next is the closing ceremony of the 47th annual meeting of the Board of Governors, and the President's news conference is at 1:30 this afternoon. And I just want to encourage you all to get involved. Thank you very much again, and let's have a good day. Good.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Yeah, thumb drives are there. I don't have, so you give me your